A very good afternoon to all our guests and panelists today. We are gathered here for one more session from MRSI's Wednesday webinars. Today, our topic is actionable and responsible AI and ML in consumer research. We will have a look at the present, some known challenges, and what lies ahead. And that's what our expert panel will speak about, share their experiences, and perhaps spotlight on what's coming up. Diana, could you go to the next slide, please? For those of you who are regulars, you know we are on season 6. MRSI's, that is Market Research Society of India's Wednesday webinars brings the best of content and knowledge to be shared with our industry at large, and specifically focused on pushing the boundaries of how information technology practices have come to play in our industry. Diana, next slide, please. Today, I'm your session host. I'm Sundar Muthuraman. I lead marketing ROI consulting. The other webinar co-hosts, session hosts, or call them the webinar committee, are people you see on the screen. Amitabh Mishra, he leads Insights and Analytics India for Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. We have Mukul Gautam, who is VP and Chief of Capacity Building Purple Audacity. He's a guy with brimming with ideas, and I'm sure you should catch some of his sessions. That if you've not caught older sessions, see our recordings, or watch this space for sessions he will post. Samir Grover, a successful entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Crownit, and he's a modest man. He says, "I don't know marketing research," but he actually has a very successful platform that supports marketing research in general. Jayesh from Entropic Tech is the global director of Insights, and from the same company we have Kumar, who's the co-founder, and I will briefly introduce him, as we progress through the session. Thanks again for panelists, and thanks audience for joining in for this afternoon session of Wednesday webinars. Next slide, please, Diana. Oh, sorry, hold on. Just go back. I can't forget MRSI. MRSI, established in 1988, is a unique not-for-profit association of providers and buyers of research and insights. And the primary purpose is to create awareness of the industry among public at large and as well as the government, establish and promote professional standards, and provide a platform for professionals in this industry to engage, showcase, and collaborate on a common cause. With that, next slide, Diana. A quick introduction to our speakers. We have Guy Solomon, CEO of Dublo. For over 20 years, Dublo and its team have been helping all types of research organizations collect data that they and their customers can trust. I think that's really the word to underline, that's trust. And you will hear more from Guy on how technology is enabling him and his organization to deliver that promise. We have Lava Kumar, founder, like I'd already mentioned, and CTO at Entropic. He's an ad tech ad research entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in building, scaling, and of course, successfully exiting software as a service business globally. And competing with him is Ritu Soni Srivastava, co-founder and CEO of the Lightbulb AI. She has exited as a successful entrepreneur twice. She has over, again, 2 decades of work experience across leading media, telecom, and technology companies. Well, I'm knocking your doors, Ritu, shortly for some funding. She's an angel investor as well, and an Inc. and a Transcend Fellow. Thanks, Ritu, Lava, and Guy, for joining us. I'm sure our audience is very excited to know more about this topic. And let me kind of invite Guy to speak about how data, is enabled and how he's building trust on the data using, the context of technology. Guy, over to you.
Thank you, Sundar.
Hey,
and
sorry. I guess I'm hungry today. Forgot to do one admin call. So, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, you can't speak to our panelists, but you can raise your questions in the GoToWebinar panel. Be assured that I will raise this question with the appropriate panelist later in the session. And in case we do have a shortage of time, We will get our panelists to respond to them on our website. Along with the recording, you will get to see their responses. Guys, sorry to interrupt. Over to you.
No problem. So thank you, Sundar, and thank you to the MRSI team for inviting me to join this panel. So we're going to talk about trusting our data, and I want to start from the beginning and what's the purpose of MR. So if you can continue to the next slide, please. If you can press just 2 more presses. Fantastic, thank you. So what's the purpose of market research? So as we see it, market research is here to help and support leaders, whether business or in opinion research, political leaders, and general population to be more knowledgeable and be more data-driven in order to make decisions that are eventually going to be doing good to their business, to the community, etc., etc. And these decisions are supported by the insights and analysis that the agencies are providing. And the agencies are hiring the smartest teams. They can have the best data processing teams, the smartest analysts, statisticians, etc. However, if the foundation is shaky, it will lead eventually to misleading insights and ultimately impacting the business itself and the decisions. And eventually that hurts our reputation as an agency. So if we go to the next slide, in a study that we ran at Dublo, so we ran a study across over thousands of customers that we have in over 150 million interviews, completed interviews done with our platform. We found that, especially when starting at the beginning of working with Dublo, we see very high level of data quality issues. And in average, we see about 45% of completed interviews has at least one quality issue, which means that you can, again, provide your client with the smartest data, the smartest insights. But if you have almost half of your data has quality issues, then you're in a very problematic area. Think how this affects the decisions that your customer is making, and ultimately how it affects your reputation and your ability to generate business. So I want to talk about the data quality and what is comprised of. So as we see it, data quality is comprised of 2 main components: how questions are answered, all right, so how the respondent is answering, which is the consistency, engagement, which comprised of idle time, bias, etc., etc. Second component is how data is being collected. So we look at the methodology, whether it's online, offline, social listening, and all other passive primary data, all that goes into that bucket. We look at data falsification by interviewers in the field or phone interviewers, bias, representation, sample, all of that goes into that bucket. And today, when I'm looking at how data is being collected, so I'm asking myself, do I really know how, if I do online study, do I really know the level of engagement of the respondents? Do I really know how coherent were their answers? Can I communicate to my customer how deeply I care about quality? Can I show my customer how much effort I'm putting into finding quality issues and eliminate them from the sample? Because today, as we all know, our customers, the brands themselves, they start to have their own market research, the research capabilities. But as an agency, we have still a lot to offer, and we win in multiple levels on the data. We know how to collect data better than anybody else. So we need to be able also to show and communicate to our customer how much we care about quality and how much effort we put into it and how we provide much better quality than our customer and their research teams can generate. So that's on the how data is being collected, how questions are being asked and are being answered. So inconsistent answer, what was the idle time, for example, how engaged were they, IP and all of the data falsification we know from other areas. So these are questions that we are asking today. Now, how AI can help us? I want to move to the next slide. And eventually AI and ML can drive us to the next level. But we need to keep in mind that the problems we are solving are still the same problems, and technology means to an end. And AI and machine learning can help us just solve these problems faster, better, and more accurately. So for example, on how data is being collected, machine learning can identify data falsification on the spot by triangulating multiple dimensions such as location, duration, voice recording, flag suspicious interviews, and disqualify them if it's well trained, if the model is well trained. On online, for example, so today there's so much money invested in trying to spot bots, for example. So AI can run this process and find these bots and spot them much faster than anybody else and provide real-time data that is much more trustworthy. On the other part, how respondents are answering. So two key elements. So one is on-spot data validation. All right. So what if your answer, what if a respondent answered that he likes a certain brand? Okay, brand number one, let's call it, and then further down the road, he says that he likes brand number two. Okay, that's the simplest example that we can have here. AI can definitely identify that and ask you the right questions to clarify that. So instead of disqualifying this interview, okay, again, also throwing away some money that you spent on it, AI can fix that and validate the real answer from that respondent. Dynamic survey, that's the second thing that we see on how respondents are answering. So today we build and we invest a lot in scripting of the survey, building a lot of code into it to make it as sophisticated as possible, exactly to make sure that we're getting the right answers. So we can solve that with AI. We can also solve the second problem, which is engagement. So AI can spot places where engagement is going down. For example, to see that the idle time has gone up or other metrics, and start building a dynamic survey that during the survey, the AI can generate and funnel the conversation towards more engaging questions or run engagement checks that we know today to increase the engagement and again, make sure that we are getting the highest quality data and answers for our survey. So if I'll kind of summarize, so we need to keep in mind that AI or machine learning and any other technology that is currently kind of in the headlights is a phenomenal technology leap that we're making and we are experiencing. We are extremely lucky to be during that era of AI and machine learning. But like any other case, and we need to keep that in mind, technology is means to an end. As we evolve and adopt more technologies, we need to keep in mind that as an agency, our reputation is on the line when it comes to data quality. So if I would leave you with one thing, let's say 4 things. So it's the 4 questions. Okay, so as a researcher, I would need to ask myself these 4 questions. How can AI, machine learning can help me drive data quality? 2, how solid is my data? Number 3, do I have the right tools and technology to secure top quality data that I can communicate to my client? And number 4, the last one, how much of my reputation is on the line because of that quality? Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. And I think the point you make is appropriate. The foundation of any insights process is data. And if there's questions on the data, then obviously everything is up for questions. And the other point that you made was about any technology. Obviously AI is got its spotlight at this time. Is about enabling and doing some things better. So in your context, and you mentioned earlier in the presentation that you've been doing this for a number of years. So where do you think AI or LLMs as we call it will find the immediate application in the context of data collection? What is that one or two key areas where you think it's going to make a big difference, in the product platform that you have, or perhaps there's somebody who's your competition who's already building it? We do not know, but where do you expect that to happen?
So that's a great question, Sundar. I'll start from one thing that I heard recently, and that's has been for some time in discussions, talking about synthetic data. So AI now is able to start generating synthetic data. So basically generate respondents, okay? Which is a whole new issue of data quality and reliability. And one of the panelists here is going to talk about ethics of research. So that's one thing in terms of data collection. What happens if AI can generate your respondents, so you don't need to go out and collect the data? And that has a lot of quality and ethical questions that needs to be solved. But if I'm bringing it down to to the everyday current situation, I think that first on online studies, so engagement and validation of the respondents, these are two key elements that AI can definitely solve much faster than the tools that we have today. And if I look on offline studies, so face-to-face, which is still very common also in India and in most parts of the world, so data falsification still happening. And while face-to-face is still allowing you to run the deepest studies and have the highest engagement because you are interviewing a person face-to-face, there's still a lot of issues that are coming out from the interviewers themselves, sometimes intentionally, sometimes just by mistake. And AI can run through these quality checks and save a lot of the quality control teams that are running today, and help them be much more productive and identify the quality issues much faster and respond to them much faster, which can then generate basically two impacts. One is on the data quality, right? So you are able to spot more quality issues. And number two, the speed will allow you to make sure that you're not sending people back to the field, rather than being able to, on the spot, tell them, here is what you need to ask. Here you need to ask this question again, or you need to fix XYZ on the spot.
Got it. Thanks, Guy, for that. And with the context of needing to have, foundational data that is of high quality and high trust, let's lead on and get our next panelist, Ritu, to kind of share her views on how the processes downstream will benefit from AI, and perhaps spotlight on the boundaries that Ritu, you and your team are trying to kind of push, right, in how it can help the market research community. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sundar, and a very happy morning to everybody at the MRSI webinar today. The future of AI/ML is bright. Today, we will be speaking about the role of AI and ML technologies in amplifying the new age researcher. And what we really mean by that is a very common fear that is often unarticulated in the minds of businesses, whether it's at the agency end or at the consumer brand end, which is that a researcher's role today may actually get displaced by AI. Diana, if I could request you to shift to the next slide. Fei Li, who's a leading AI thought leader and the creator of ImageNet and a fellow at Stanford, very rightly observed that artificial intelligence tools are actually not a substitute for human intelligence. They are not intended to replace human beings. They are simply tools that can amplify the ability of humans to be more creative, ingenuous, insightful, amplify our best aspects, and take away everything that detracts from bringing our best versions forward. So if you step back and look at the entire flow of any market research project, from business problem definition to the research objective articulation or to the design creation, you will see that there are specific areas where AI tools can actually be deployed to help amplify a researcher instead of trying to replace them. whether it's respondent sourcing and recruitment, which is the first phase, or the second phase, which is data collection, or the third phase, which encompasses structuring and formatting the data so that you can analyze it, to the actual analysis itself, and the final piece of insight generation and reporting. It's worthwhile to see that researchers should be spending a lot of their time on the last insight generation and reporting, which will disperse it to consumer brand stakeholders. But instead, they spend a lot of time on the mechanics or the logistics of the research itself, which is time better spent by AI, which can do the heavy lifting. Next slide, please. What I do intend to do today is just talk you through some of the key areas in which artificially intelligent tools, not necessarily mine, but belonging to the industry as a whole, can actually enable the researcher to do what they do best. Let's talk for a second about respondent sourcing and recruitment. Today, the primary work here is done via fieldwork manually and sometimes via online panels. Post-COVID, that's increasing dramatically. But the real fact checking can only be done at a fact level, which is name, email, and phone number checks. Like, Guy brought out beautifully, the patterns of behavior in terms of idle time, in terms of engagement levels, can help you tighten the respondent sourcing and recruitment and data collection process. But issues like professional respondents who give multiple responses to various brands, low quality of respondents, people who are inarticulate, people who haven't necessarily had the right kind of experience to be able to provide feedback and insights. All of these are not necessarily addressed with the tools that we can have today. Simple tools like facial identity and voice checks to identify whether you've sourced the right identity, whether the right gender, the right ethnicity, using device IPs, the right location. Are you actually getting the respondents that you've paid for? The ability for conversational AI tools like the ones present on Lightbulb to do coherency checks, to see whether the respondent is speaking at a understandable ideal rate. Are they able to articulate themselves properly, or is it just a series of ums and ahs and inarticulate conversation that basically wastes the researcher's time? These are all various tools that can be deployed during the process of respondent sourcing recruitment to make sure that you end up with the right respondent who is able to provide you with the kind of insight that you need. This also has implications on cost, because the money that you're spending to source these respondents is obviously much better utilized when you have these checkpoints in place. And as Guy said, the quality and output is definitely better. Moving forward to the aspect of data collection, today, quantitative is primarily survey-based with some amount of facial coding added. Qualitative depends primarily on notes, meeting recordings, manual transcription, manual translation, and then a researcher has the job of aggregating all of these multiple data sources. With AI ML tools that perform end-to-end for quantitative projects on a single platform, whether you've conducted the study live, on ground in a CLT, or whether you're doing it online, you have the ability to bring in technologies like facial coding, eye tracking, conversational AI, data surveys, all into one compact platform, so that all of the data resides in one place. It is time-stamped with the customer's response, linked to the stimulus in question. And whether it's a qualitative survey, you have automated recording, transcripts, translations. So about 60 to 70% of a researcher's time that is spent in actually aggregating, structuring, and laying out and analyzing the data, all of that goes away and can be done in a few clicks by automated tools, leaving the researcher to do what they do best, draw conclusions and insights from the data that can be sliced and diced in multiple ways. Let's move on to data structuring and formatting today. Trend creation, pattern mapping, these all require skill sets that take years to acquire. With automated aggregation and calculation, you can now look at data across psychographics, demographics, locations, geographies, brand preferences. The data residing on a platform can be sliced and diced with the click of a button to offer you various aspects of the same problem. What's very interesting in this space is the ability to now use large language models and generative AI like Claude and Llama and Bard and Vertex to actually flexibly query the data. So for instance, if you have a quantitative study, you can actually, as a researcher, type in a prompt that will allow the system to respond to you. Assume you're on a qualitative survey, you can ask the system to tell you, find for me all of the moments when there was a positive response regarding a particular brand. And instead of the researcher having to go through his notes or watch a 90-minute qualitative recording, the system pulls out the data in seconds, allowing you to spend your time doing the analysis as a researcher. And then, of course, when you move to the data analysis space, whether it's emotion, whether it's looking at attention trends, whether it's getting right down to what in the stimulus is attracting attention through heat maps and gaze plots and areas of interest, the ability of tools today to bring multiple technologies to one project really amplify the ability of a researcher to tap into unstated responses. I think what is going to happen over the course of the next decade is that research is going to become very researcher friendly and cut down on all the manual, inefficient work that researchers used to carry as a load, allowing them time to really focus on insights that will help business outcomes. On that note, I'll stop. Over to you, Sundar.
Thank you, Ritu. Just a couple of observations and perhaps a question to you, right? Hang on, I don't know whether it's my screen or somebody's who popped up, which popped up a microcreate mode. Yeah. So the observation is as follows, right? Any technology brings with it a lot of promise, and obviously we want to solve a wide spectrum of problems with any technology that is trending, for example, right? Now, as somebody who has kind of been through, two startup cycles, and obviously you've caught two good waves, I would suspect. Do you think this is all hype? Do you think this is, incrementally very small, or it is as large as the transformational talk that's happening around this space? Because some of the context and examples where large language models have done very well is on data that they've already been trained on, right? But there's a lot of contextual data that is specific to, in our case, a survey or a business context, which perhaps the model does not understand enough, right? It's like, me who's being in marketing will suddenly speak about option trading. It's not going to cut ice, right? So how do you see this? Is it evolutionary? Is it like the all the promises that you just spoke of is like around the corner? I mean, you were safely saying the next decade. That's like who knows what you and I are going to do at that time, right? So I'm just trying to bring you back to say, uh, get you to commit something, say in the next 6 months, next 1 year. What do you think is going to happen?
Okay, Sundar, I think that's beautifully articulated and very well put. Um, Honestly, I think the transformation that we will see over the next 2 years is bigger than any of us can imagine at this point of time. We are merely skimming the tip of the iceberg right now with what's possible with AI and ML. Having said that, coming back to your point on business context, I think the way that we look at AI and ML technologies is that they are a weapon in the hands of the right wielder or warrior. They can be a fearsome thing. In the hands of the untrained, they'll not even be able to cut a zucchini. So it's all a matter of how you use a tool to give you the results you need, and how well you deploy it. And that's where the role of companies like us and Entropic come in. We are here to handhold and assist and help further the cause of the market research industry, because this is a transformative space in an absolutely huge market with life-changing implications. And I'll stop grandiosing at that point.
All right. So you're saying, watch this space. There's going to be dramatic changes in the next 2 years, right? Okay. All right. Wonderful. So which means, we have to embrace what's coming up, be ready for it, be prepared for it. And I'm hoping that, forums like this that MRSI will bring to our industry will help a bit in that direction, right? And you did speak about Entropic and people like yourself who will, kind of nudge us in the right direction. Kumar, over to you with that note. I've heard that you are extremely passionate about the context of bias, ethics, and perhaps scale, being an entrepreneur yourself. So over to you. Tell us about what we are dealing with. How should we start thinking about some of the things that's upon us already, in a manner of speaking. Over to you.
Thanks, Sundar. Thanks, MRSI, for having me here in this webinar. And as Guy and Ritu kind of set the context around the evolution of AI, how things are actually moving at scale, as we look at the different applications of AI in market research or consumer research, I think we need to start looking at from a different perspective as well, right? So if you go to the next slide, a simple quote that means a lot, that has a pretty in-depth from Harper Lee, who's a big novelist, if you guys are into fiction side of things. So you can't really know or understand what a person is going through until you see all those things from their point of view. That could be, as a researcher, looking at how these AI tools are evolving. Is that going to be a threat to my job? Which Ritu covered a little bit, saying that it's not going to be a threat. It's going to be more of like, hey, helping you aid, helping you streamline, helping you operationalize things, getting more productivity, getting more efficiency at scale. From a brand standpoint, am I reaching the right audience? Am I talking to the right audience? Am I getting the right responses? Which Guy covered in terms of, are those responses really real responses? Are those fake responses? What's the engagement looking like? Where there are things actually coming in terms of making sure people are just not taking enough time to just articulate things. What is the idle time looking like? What's the engagement looking like? As we scale things up to the next level, we need to start looking at from a holistic point, right? So again, just to reiterate and summarize the end-to-end journey from a market research standpoint. So we focus on capturing consumer behavior at scale. That could be stated, unstated, it could be emotions, ideas, diaries, different form factors that we have all been familiar with, that we have been doing for the last 30, 40 years or so. How do we do that at scale? How do we reach the audience at scale? How do we ensure that the audience that we are reaching are the right intended audience that we want to get feedback from? So different applications of AI and ML helpful is today when you want to reach a particular, when you want to go do a particular market research activity, you end up having to work with about 7 to 8 vendors on an average. It could be agencies, a mix of different agencies. So there's a lot of automation at play where panel aggregations have started coming in big time. Now there's a next wave of panel aggregations, which Guy a little bit talked about, which is your synthetic user personas who are actually answering on behalf of real users. How does that actually take shape? Is that data going to be driven by real user consent? Are those data trained based on real user data? What kind of data is that? There's like a lot of conundrums and ethics that revolves around it. The second is, once you've collected data, and whether you work with 5 agencies, 7 agencies, or there's an automated platform that takes care of distribution and collection and the quality of data from data capture standpoint, how do you ensure the data that you've collected is clean? How do you ensure that you organize your data? How do you remove some of the unwanted skewed data set that might primarily impact? What about bringing your primary data, primary research data, which is your quant or qual or other aspects of it? What about all the secondary research data? You need to have a holistic view when it comes to research, right? It's not just primary research, but you also need to take into account secondary research data that's already out there, or that's actually shaping up in real time in Twitter or in other social media platforms. You need to be able to combine both primary and secondary research in order to be able to look at what next, what to build next, what to launch next, what ad to put out next, right? Once I have this data available for me to look at both primary and secondary together, how do I identify themes? How do I identify patterns? How do I identify different trends based on the data that is evolving as we speak, or the data that actually have collated in the last 6 months, year, 2 years, 5 years? Every single brand actually has tons and tons of these interviews, brand equity reports, brand tracks that I've been doing for the last, since the existence. How do I start looking at themes, trends based on historical data? Can I apply those themes, trends into what the future might look like? Do I actually have systems that can actually do this at scale? So that's another application where AI ML is starting to take shape in terms of how do I leverage the existing data? How do I leverage new data that's coming in? How do I leverage the existing or user generated data that's out in the wild, being able to collate that together with the primary research data and the past data to be able to look at future predictions. So being able to, once you have your data collection done, data organized, once you're able to start looking at themes, with AI, without AI, or AI helping you throughout the process, how do you create these beautiful insights? How do you discover these insights based on what consumers said, right? So that's like in terms of articulating the verbatims that you have generated, that you've gathered from all your interviews, or the survey responses that you've collected together. Once you have that, how do I transform those evidences into actionable insights? So today we end up with the primary PowerPoint deck or a PDF, talks about, hey, here's what the process looked like from a research standpoint, here's what the verbatims are, and here's what potential alternatives or potential recommendations of what we could do. What if that process can also take a researcher to the next level in terms of AI helping you, guiding you as a part of the process? I think the current wave where a lot of AI ML changes are actually happening, and then there's this buzzword about generative AI, which for a fact, I mean, there's a lot of value in different industries. But as Sundar was talking about, generative AI is a lot more generic, a lot more horizontal in nature, really good at solving certain things, but may not understand the nuances of the consumer research, market research, the key terminologies. How do we look at the data? I think it's time, and then one of the things that we're going to start seeing evolve in the next phase from an AI, ML, generative AI standpoint is having vertical LLMs that understands the insight, that understands the consumer research landscape, that can actually take us to the next level. While we have all of these different aspects covered, how do we ensure that these things are able to scale? Being able to do this at one project, two projects, 5 projects, that is something that can happen today at a pace based on how things are. Can I do this at like 50 projects, 100 projects, 500 projects, right? That's where the scale comes in. And when we capture people's emotions, when we capture people's data, when we look at the synthetic users, what are the bias that comes in it? Am I training my data on the right data set? Am I having a right representative population so that the data that I've collected is actually from the real data set that actually represents the right population? Is my AI having implicit bias? So these are some of the questions that we also need to start thinking about when we start deploying AI, deploying generative AI. Even generative AI is prone to bias. Depending on what kind of data that's been trained on, fed on, you're going to see outcomes, outputs that are going to be fine-tuned towards what the system has learned, rather than based on what is right, what is wrong, taking into account these different cultural perspectives, different geo-regional perspectives, different AI ethical related stuff that's coming into in terms of what to say, what not to say, what is right, what is wrong. That's where human insights combined together with AI insights going to play a big factor in taking things forward. If you could move to the next slide. So again, just taking the step, right? So am I capturing the right data? Am I capturing with consent? And the consent is not just enough, right? Me being able to capture users' data in wherever they are, whichever device they are, wherever they're actually consuming the content, being able to do that at scale without any hindrances, without forcing them into a particular mold, is another big factor that's going to make important decisions in terms of how we aggregate data at scale, capture data at scale. While we tend to be able to capture data at scale, it's also not just capturing it, also how do we store the data? What kind of data privileges that users who actually gave the data have? Can they have the data deleted at will? How do you ensure the data that you have collated stays within the protocols? How do you ensure your PII data is actually not going out, or how do you abstract your PII data? A lot of frameworks on user privacy security is starting to shape up. And in fact, EU has actually taken a step forward in terms of regulating AI to a larger extent. And we are going to see this taking shape in most of the markets as more and more vendors start collecting more user specific data. And that becomes a key factor in terms of what do we use the data for, how do we use the data for, which will in turn come back to how we collected, what we collected, and where we collected. If you could go to the next slide. So once we collect the data, this is the second piece which I was talking about, which is the biases that might come in, depending on who is writing the algorithms, depending on what kind of data set that has actually gone into training these algorithms. How do I ensure the data that I've collected does not actually have false positives or false negatives? How do I minimize the impact of false positives, false negatives on my research? Because what we do is fundamentally going to have a big impact from an end consumer standpoint. And we need to make sure that any data that we put out to our customers have the highest possible accuracy with highest confidence as much as possible, right? If there's if the line typically ends up not getting met, then we're going to start seeing a heavy regulation, heavy compliance-driven markets, which may not bode well in terms of innovation. But I think there has to be a line that has to be drawn where compliance and regulations and the user privacy and user security is really important. But at the same time, AI systems that we are building today that's going to be used for future takes into account all the ethical related aspects, the bias aspects, the geographic spread, the racial aspects, all of that stuff, right? So the more and more we delve into data, the more important it is for us to have a representative view of what we put in, how we collect it, how we process it, how we represent it. And wherever AI comes in, all of these different pillars have to be at the forefront when using a system, defining a system, evaluating a system. When anybody is looking at evaluating a platform to build or use as a part of their market research workflow, consumer research workflow, these data points have to be there as a part of the evaluation workflow, because this is going to determine what the future is going to hold, how the future is going to be shaped up. With that, I think I come to the end of my slide.
Thank you, Kumar. I think it's always important to consider societal impact, especially on the ethical dimensions as we embrace new technologies. And that question is up there. And we know we've all traded our personal data for some benefit, starting with email and chat and whatnot, right? But yes, and I think in a lot of quarters and, perhaps people who have inside view of how data is getting used, we've started asking this question on, what is the boundary, what is the border, how do we kind of make sure that we are ethical in what we do, and that's important, right? And I think not only regulation, and as much as regulation will, kind of put some guardrails around this, and I think it's each one of our responsibilities to kind of wield the tool, to borrow Ritu's words on, it's in the hands of the user, and we need to kind of use it appropriately. I have several questions, right? There was one theme that I saw in several, which is about, hey, is all this for only qual research? Because, what about quant, right? That's one flavor. Is it only online? What about offline? Was, kind of another flavor. So if you can, share your thoughts on these two questions, perhaps in the same order that we called you in today as panelists. So starting with you, Guy, Ritu, and Kumar, if you can just answer these questions quickly, right? Is it for only qual? What about quant? Hey, this all seems great from an online perspective. What about a lot of the work that we do today, which is definitely not online, right? So that's one theme of questions.
So this is a great question. And the reason is you're touching a point that I think people tend to neglect a lot of time when they talk about technology and, in this case, AI, etc. Still, a big chunk of the world is still not connected, and we tend to forget it. And still, a big chunk of the world doesn't have access to mobile phones, internet, technology in different shapes. And brands still wants to hear their voices, and we see that happening across the world. And we work in so last year our customers collected data in over 200 countries, and we see that challenge comes up every time. And when we think about how to apply AI and machine learning, we try to think of, all right, so how we can help to the connected population, but how we can help also the researchers that operate in less connected areas of the world. And one of the challenges there, the key challenges, is how do you do it in real time? Whenever a researcher is going to an area that is not connected for a couple of days, and they want to collect data. So we are building into our technology the ability to do it in the device itself. Okay, it has a lot of challenges to become real kind of AI like we know it, but we apply a lot of the technology into the device itself while it's not connected. But the smarter part happens also outside of it. So once the researcher goes back to their office, etc., and the data is uploaded to the cloud, then AI really helps us get the insights very quickly on what worked, what didn't work in the field work, and if they need to correct the information, so AI can help us kind of complete the gaps or spot any quality issues as fast as possible, also once that they are online, and then fix them in the fastest manner possible.
All right. Thanks, Guy. Over to you, Ritu. Your views on that.
Thank you so much. So on the question between quantitative and qualitative, I can see how that question came up because a lot of the chatter was, around qualitative. But what's interesting for us as we, get deeper into this industry is that we're seeing that the lines between quantitative and qualitative are actually blurring. Quantitative was very numerically focused, very objective. But I think what quant doesn't take into account is measuring the intensity of emotion and engagement that lies behind every quantitative survey. AI and ML tools, such as some of the ones that are represented here, can actually bring an element into quantitative research that is missing today. I may say a yes, but is that a vehement yes? Is that a lukewarm yes? This is just one small example. And on the other hand, if you look at qualitative, it used to be very conversation based, very insight based, but today the lines there are blurring. With technology, you have the ability to test stimulus in real time during a qualitative conversation and use those inputs to probe further during the call conversation. So it's just today there's been in our view unnecessary division. Research is ultimately about finding the real human truth or insight that will help you answer a business problem. These quantitative and qualitative are merely methods to get there. And with the penetration of AI tools, these lines will blur. The deployment of technologies across each of these areas will blur. And I think it's going to be a much more comprehensive and collaborative ecosystem going forward. Similarly, when you talk about online and offline, I think Guy had a beautiful point about edge technologies and on-device technologies being the future of AI ML tools, where you will be able to take that technology into the field on your device in your hand, regardless of data connectivity. That is definitely the future. It's already happening. I think what's also very interesting is the fact that the mobile revolution in emerging markets means that today you are carrying practically a mobile phone in every hand today, even in the hinterlands, has access to mobile data. The speed and the bandwidth may be compromised, but you still have a lifeline connected to the rest of the world. I think between these two innovations, on-device and edge technologies, and the fact that you can use your mobile device to access AI ML tools and large language models, which are text-based, we're sending research and fieldwork workers out there armed like they've never been before. So I hope that shares a few points. Yep. Over to Lara, please.
Yeah, so I think Ritu pretty much stole my words as well. So you pretty much summarized it really well. Yeah, so irrespective of what research method it is, quant, qual, I think the lines are blurring. We are seeing a lot of mixed methods that's actually happening at scale these days as well, which is like trends that we are seeing across the board with all our customers. So irrespective of what mechanism that's actually being used to understand consumer behavior, to understand consumer feedback, capture customer feedback, AI, ML is something that can be applied respectively wherever it is. And the beautiful thing about AI, ML is it's agnostic to what type of research you're doing. It's able to meaningfully collate your quantitative so-called data sets, which are generated 300, 500, whatever the volumes are, and your qualitative interviews that you're doing with, let's say, 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, IDIs or dyads or FGDs, being able to combine together and derive insights together meaningfully is where a lot of value is going to drive in, rather than looking at quant separately, qual separately, and all these things in a more siloed manner. Being able to do that at scale is where a lot of benefits is going to drive, and that's where we're starting to see the world is also moving towards that, right? And when it comes to offline versus online, I think the mobile usage, I mean, there's like enough data out there about mobile penetration, data penetration, smartphone penetrations. But I think every single system, every single device today has enough storage that you could pretty much go into a Wild West with about a weeks of no internet or even 2 weeks of no internet, still do a 500,000 member interview, studies, whatever it is, and then come back a month later you upload all of them, and all of your data crunching happens in seconds, right? So you don't really need data crunching to happen on the edge. You need data storage to happen on the edge or on the field, so that you don't end up missing those key user feedback moments that gets captured in raw, which is what you need to analyze at the end of the day whenever you have internet, whenever you upload to the system. And that could be a week, 2 weeks, a couple of days later, it doesn't really matter.
Interesting, right? So perhaps we all could take a shot at creating a new phrase of describing research. It's not no longer qual or quant. What is the one phrase description that you will put on the table? Sales pitch, quickly, come on.
Can you hear the question?
Yeah, the question, Guy, is, traditionally we've said there is a quant study and there's a qual study, and, obviously there are elements of each of these. And we heard all of you say that those lines are blurring, right? So you at the end of the day, you're collecting data, right? You're collecting information that as a marketer or as a brand you don't have today, and that's the gap this information collection is filling, right? The mechanism used was, go 20 years ago, it was cyclo-style copies of questionnaires. Today you have tabs going into the field, but essentially we are still doing the same thing, collecting information and collecting quality information and ensuring that it's robust and not biased and so on and so forth, right? And to kind of make our lives easier, we said, okay, here is a structured questionnaire where we are going to kind of completely straitjacket what you collect, and we called it Quant. And we said, okay, speak your mind, we'll record everything, and we will then sit down in a nice air-conditioned room and interpret. That became Qual, right? So now, obviously, repeating what all of you said, those lines are blurring. It's at the end of the day information that we want to capture and collect. So would you want to venture a new name for this mode of operation? Is it what? Machine learned service? No?
I think still humans are the center of it, right? Unless synthetic users take over the world, where we don't end up answering surveys or we don't give feedback. Yeah, coming up with the name, I think, yeah, you guys and MRSI, that's the industry body. We're going to look at find those.
All right. So we will do a straw poll in our next webinar and say, hey guys, this was the thought, do a name suggestion. And that's, I guess, Diana, if you're recording this, that's a good engagement thought to, get our audience excited. But moving on, right? So if you say there's one thing that you're seeing that I, as a researcher, need to change on how I think or how I do things, what is that one thing? Because technology is going to change the way information is collected, analyzed, represented, perhaps not so much, even interpreted. So if you say, if all of you look at the engagements you had in this, in the context of MR, data collection, interpretation, analysis, insight generation, what is one old habit which served its purpose, which was good when it happened, but what do you think I should kind of rethink in the age that's coming up, where machines are going to help solve some critical problems that humans could not? I'm a researcher joining the industry, or I'm a gray-haired guy who's saying this is how things are done in the industry. So what would, you could look at me and say, Sundar, you be aware, change this, right? Yeah. Okay. What is that?
I'll take a shot at that. I think we're all in the same age category. So Sundar, you're absolutely among us right now. But what I would love for the research community to think about is, are we more invested in the process, or are we more invested in the insight and outcomes? Because today, the traditional market is wedded to the process. There is a sense of certainty that if you do things in this order, you will eventually arrive at the correct answer. And that's great. That's how it's been. But I think obsession with the answer, which is often unstated and not obvious, needs to be the pursuit and not the rigor of a traditional process. So that's what I would love for the research community to take away, that it's great in this era of AI and ML to experiment with technology, to deviate from traditional processes and be really invested in the insight and the outcome, because that's what we're here for. It's the pursuit of a real human truth at the end of the day that we are all working towards, whether as a tool or whether as a researcher.
Thank you, Ritu. Kumar and Guy, any
Yeah,
I would love.
go ahead, Guy.
Thank you. I would love to echo Ritu's saying, and if I go back to the pyramid slide that I had at the beginning, eventually we are here to support decision makers making, the best decisions they can make, whether for their business, for their country, etc., etc. And if one thing we need to keep in mind is to keep our eyes on the ball, and that's the ball, is supporting these guys make the best decisions they can have. The way to that, if it's online study, offline study, questionnaire, quant, AI, it's all means to that end, and we need to keep that in mind. And if I go one layer down, we need to make sure that the quality of that data collection, insights, all of that eventually drives to that best conclusion that we can deliver to our client and helping them making the best decisions they can make.
All right.
Yeah. So I think the focus back to why you're doing what you're doing. What is the objective of why you want to do a particular research activity? I think that's what should be driving, irrespective of what method it is or what process it is. Because we evolved from a CATI, CAPI to Quant and Qual and then Neuro and then AI now. There's going to be something else that's going to come up another 5-10 years from now. So things are going to evolve. But at the end of the crux of all of these things is, hey, here's a problem I had, or here's a question I have. I want to get this question answered. I think the focus should always be on that, irrespective of what it takes to get there. And there could be 100 different ways to get there. And how do we get there is less of a problem with AI. But did we really get there? And why are we even there? Or what is it we're looking for is something that we need to focus more and more on.
Right.
Got it. So, I'm just going to call out an observation that one of our audience, Sharmila Das, put up, I think, for the question I asked. She said, we call ourselves method neutral. So I guess there you have one already. Okay. So just quickly, the last question to all of you. Obviously, we've had conversations with people like yourself, and we've invited you to this session as thought leaders in this space. And we know each of the organizations that you represent or you co-found and run, co-founded and run, actually is pushing the boundaries. We have no doubts about that. So you are known now to at least 100+ odd people. So one of the questions that's come is saying, will this work in English? Is it for me? Is it in my language, etc. Right? And along with that, the other question was, can you recommend some tools or applications that we can go and explore, right? So in addition to yourself, if you want to spotlight, somebody you're engaged with or competition, perhaps, I'm fine. As long as you are. So just call out a few names that or interesting things that you have come across that people should go and explore. And obviously, address that question on, is it all English? What happens in my language and so on and so forth, right? With that, we'll wind up. We have about 2 minutes, so perhaps 30 seconds to each of you. So Kumar, do you want to go first and Guy second?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Yeah.
I'll shamelessly start my plug about Entropic and Decode. So yeah, definitely go to entropic.io, look at Decode. Decode is our integrated end-to-end consumer research platform. So again, quant, qual, neuro, emotion, all of this stuff. So irrespective of what methodology it is, you're able to look at what your research objective is. Are you able to answer the research objective? That's what our focus is, irrespective of what methods you end up using. We are device language agnostic. So just put some numbers in perspective. We support about 65 different languages on transcription, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't really matter what language it is. You are covered. And obviously, there are alternatives out in the market. And feel free to reach out to us. We'll let you know what those alternatives are as well.
So you're skipping the one more question.
Which is?
No, I think name one more tool or platform or application that you would ask our audience to go and explore.
I just want people to reach out so I can tell that one more.
Okay, fair enough. Over to you, Guy.
So our customers have been collecting data last year of, I don't know, over probably 200 different languages. And if I take, for example, just in India, you have tens, if not more, of different languages. and we were exploring a lot of the language models, and we found that there's no one winner that takes it all. Neither Amazon, Google, any other language. So I would suggest our viewers to explore the key kind of tools that we have today, whether it's AWS or Google's, and Ritu also can maybe recommend a few others, and see what works best for them, because when it works, the results are phenomenal, and it can help you expedite the process very quickly. Number two, I will go to the very basics. Go to ChatGPT, play with it. Just play with it as much as you can, see what it gets you, because that's, as I see it, that's the best kind of AI 101. It helps you understand what it can do for you. And then, any of the companies that are to my left and right here, both Kumar's and Ritu's products, go test it. You'll be amazed.
Sure. Thanks, Guy. Over to you, Ritu.
Thank you so much. I will echo everything that both of these guys have said. I think let me start with the second question first. One of the technologies that I am personally fascinated by is DALL-E, which is OpenAI's image search and image generation tool. And though it's a subscription, it's a very small, very affordable subscription. I would encourage researchers in the space of quantitative and qualitative research to just spend some time experimenting with DALL-E, because one of the items that was spoken about today was the ability, I think, Sundar, we were discussing it before the meeting, the ability to create creatives on the fly and not depend on designers or ad agencies. And the era of ad democratization, like design democratization, has happened. DALL-E is bringing about the creative democratization. You can actually visualize creatives with just a few words. So I think that is some absolutely fascinating technology that can be used in multiple ways in the research process, right from a recruitment to finding the right respondent to actually creating creative. So my suggestion is play with DALL-E if you can. It's a brilliant tool. It'll blow your mind. On different other products, Entropic is doing a phenomenal job. We're following in their footsteps, and we're happy to say we can do everything you can do, just maybe with less years of experience. And we're looking forward to aligning with Dublo. I think we're a great complementary technology, but not blowing wind at anyone. I think everybody is very, very talented in their own regard. Whoever you choose to partner with, I think just look for a partner that brings the same level of passion about the subject to your projects, and you'll be in good hands. But thank you again, Sundar, for giving us this opportunity to blow our little horn a little bit.
Thanks. No, thanks for all of you to take time and spotlight on what's coming up. Because it's a space that is top of mind for, I guess, everyone in business. Because it's not only about how it's going to transform processes of the business, it's going to also impact people. So it's I'm sure it's a top question in a lot of business leader minds. Thanks for coming on today. Thanks for taking time to be with us. A big thank you from all of us at MRSI and our audience. And there are some questions that have remained unanswered. Diana will reach out to each of you, and you can put in your answers, and we'll post it along with the video recording of this session. Watch this space. MRSI will be in touch with all of you announcing the next session. Thank you very much otherwise, and a good day to all of you. Guy, get your lunch. Guys in India, grab a coffee. Good evening and good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.